The Good Samaritan. I suppose if we were to ever ask the community out there, what do you know from Scripture? They'd probably know this one, the Good Samaritan. The story of the guy who's on his way to Jerusalem. He gets beat up and robbed, and the two good guys pass by on the other side, and then this Samaritan that nobody wants to talk to or speak of in any way, shape, or form if you're a good Jew, he's the guy that stops. How weird is that? And you know the point of the story too, don't you? So I could probably just say, what do you think the point is? It's about being a good neighbor.
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? It's a neighborly day in this beauty wood, a neighborly day for a beauty. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? I have always wanted to have a neighbor just like you. I've always wanted to live in a neighborhood with you, so let's make the most of this beautiful day. Since we're together, we might as well say, would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Won't you please? Won't you please? Please won't you be my neighbor?
You all know that, don't you? Everybody smiled when it came on. Now, interestingly enough, if your grandchildren or maybe even your children will not know this, because Mr. Rogers went off the air in 2001. Actually, the program quit being made in 2001, and actually went off the air completely. It wasn't even on MeTV anymore after 2008. So the youngest kids in our congregation and your friends and family are not going to know Mr. Rogers, but you all did, and you should have seen the smiles on your faces. Won't you be my neighbor? Mr. Rogers actually was a Presbyterian minister. Did you know that? And he actually took a lot of his shows from this story of the Good Samaritan. And that opening song is exactly from this text. On TV, he couldn't announce that, but I've seen interviews with him, and that's what's behind this song. Won't you be my neighbor? Have you ever been in a situation where you needed a neighbor? I mean, stop and think about this. If you got stuck on a road, you know, your car broke down, and I realize you've all got cell phones, and you probably pick up the phone and call 911, or you call AAA or somebody. But if somebody pulled over to the side of the road and offered to help you, who would you accept help from? Or more likely, who would you not accept help from? Now, one of the requirements that we pastors go through in order to be a pastor is something called clinical pastoral education, abbreviated CPE. It's a summer unit, of course, that we take, and it involves basically being a chaplain in a hospital. But behind that, and more importantly than serving as a chaplain in the hospital, it's a time for us to do some pretty deep psychological thinking and praying about who we are and how we react pastorally in situations. That's the hard part of CPE. The easy part is being the chaplain. The hard part is the analysis that would happen afterwards. And I served in a psychiatric hospital. And so one of the early questions our supervisor asked me was, what's the most frightening person you can imagine that would come at you as you opened the double doors into your unit? And the image I had of the person that I would be most afraid of was a big burly football type player with long hair and a beard. I have no clue where that came from. There was nobody in my life that was like that. But that was my image of the person that would scare the liver out of me if he ever came at me as I opened up the doors. Now, he's the image of the person I would not want to have help me at the side of the road. Okay? If he stopped his truck, of course he'd have a truck, you know, and he'd probably be wearing a baseball cap, and he might even have a gun rack and a dog in back of his truck. Boy, is that an image, isn't it? But if I saw that, I would be one to roll up my windows and speak to him through a little 1-inch opening at the top and say, "No, that's okay. I've called AAA." It's hard to receive help from people who aren't like us. And that was what this image was. It was somebody that wasn't anything like me, wasn't even anything like anybody I knew. And that's part of why it scared me. And so if somebody like that approached my window, you might call him a Samaritan. Would I be willing, if I were the guy in the ditch, the lady in the car, would I roll down my window? Would I stand with him on the side of the road while I waited for the AAA truck to show up? Probably not. I'd lock the doors. I'd probably roll up the window and speak to him through a little 1-inch slit in my window. Now, you've got your own images of who that might be. But for the guy in the ditch in the story, that's what this Samaritan was. He was the scariest thing he could even imagine. And yet, all the good guys pass by, and the Samaritan stops. Someone once said that, in fact, the Good Samaritan story is the autobiography of Jesus. He told this story, and it was as if this were his own story. Listen to this for just a minute. Jesus, who found us on the road, broken and bleeding, picked us up, carried us, patched our wounds, paid the bill, and then said he'd come back. Isn't that the Jesus story? Found us broken and bleeding by the side of the road, picked us up, carried us to safety, patched our wounds, paid the bill, and promised to come back. Can we accept that help from Jesus? See, that's the image of the Samaritan, isn't it? Can we let other people be our neighbors? Often in this story, we focus the other way around. We focus on how we can be neighbors to someone else. But I'm going to get to that in just a minute. But I think we also need to ask, who can we let be our neighbors? Who will we accept help from? Will we accept help from Jesus? Will we accept help from fill in the blank? The big burly football player with long hair and a beard? I hope and pray that you realize that there are all sorts of people in our world who truly do have good hearts and kind souls, and they don't all look like us. So what about us? Let's turn the tables for just a minute. Turn the tables to us, serving, being a neighbor to someone else. Now, I got to compliment you guys, because I know you all fairly well, and I would say to you all, you're pretty good neighbors. Mr. Rogers would be happy to have you in his neighborhood. I don't hear a lot of squabbling going on. I don't hear a lot of unrest happening. I don't hear a lot of backbiting. You know, you guys are pretty good neighbors. When asked to help, most of you say yes. When challenged to move beyond the four walls of this building, you do a pretty good job of that. So my question today is, how could we be a better neighbor? Because you're already pretty good. How could we be a better neighbor? What does it take to be a better neighbor? First of all, I think it requires that we kind of push our comfort zones out a bit. That's not easy. It's easy to be a neighbor where I'm comfortable. But if we're going to be a better neighbor, we got to expand those comfort zones a bit. You see, you don't get to choose who your neighbors are in today's world. You know, they just buy the house next door or behind you, and you're stuck with them, right? Some of them are pretty good neighbors. Some of them are pretty weird. But you're stuck with them. And in this world, it's not just who bought the house next door, but it's a whole global community that we live in now. And so we can't choose our neighbors in any way, shape, or form. Gone are the days of the family compounds, although I will confess the Millvilles still have one up in Niagara County. They all live within 3 square miles of each other, and they do get to choose their neighbors because they buy big lots and then give a piece of it to the son or the daughter, and it keeps going in the family. Now, don't tell my husband I said that. But we cannot normally choose our neighbors in any way, shape, or form. Our neighbors are people who have different opinions than us, don't they? How many of you have somebody, maybe you guys are, a member of the Tea Party? Imagine how hard it would be if your neighbor were a member of the Tea Party and you were a liberal Democrat. That's going to, you've got one? You're imagining that, yes. It would be tough. They'd have very different opinions about everything because they just come at life from a different direction. Those are two opposite poles, and yet they might be your neighbor. How can you be a neighbor to even someone like that who's a liberal Democrat when you're a member of the Tea Party, or a member of the Tea Party when you're the liberal Democrat? Your neighbors might not look like you anymore. We live in a world that is global. And it's interesting, when I was in Africa, I got to experience what it was like to be accepted as a neighbor by people I never knew. We had the privilege of visiting a Maasai village. Now, the Maasai people are the ones that are really, really tall, and they have like toothpick legs. If you've ever looked them up online or in an encyclopedia, they're the 7-foot tall people. And they have this crazy thing about jumping. That's the dance they do. They jump, and I can't jump, but they jump up and down. They're delightfully warm people. And we had the privilege of visiting one of their family, they do choose their neighbors, their family compounds. It's called a boma, B-O-M-A. And it's an expandable space. It's expandable by the thorny acacia that they cut down and create as a fence. So they just make it wider or not. And they build their huts, and I won't tell you what they build them out of because you don't really want to know. But the kids in that community were absolutely amazing. These are kids. Some of you who are women in particular may know about the dresses that they make now out of pillowcases. You just cut off one end, and from that you make straps, and you kind of gather it up, and you put the straps on, and bingo, you got a dress. It's amazing, and they send them all over the world. Well, I saw some of those dresses on kids in this boma, this Maasai village that we had the privilege of visiting. But the kids came right up to us, wrapped their arms around our legs like all kids will do, wanted desperately to hold our hands, wanted desperately to show us their newest toy, which consisted of one of those little rings like a button with a hole in it and a string where you round it up. You remember this? And you pulled it tight and the thing went okay? That was the toy. And this one little boy kept running in front of us, having a blast showing us his toy. They accepted us even though we didn't look anything like them. We were a different color. I was a whole lot shorter than any other women in that community. I'm a whole lot wider than the women of that community. And yet those kids could not wait to hold our hands and to walk with us. They wanted us to be their neighbor. Whew. What a privilege that is, to be invited to do that. We didn't look anything like them. There's people closer to home, my friends, that don't look anything like us. And they too are our neighbors. I pray that they feel that same warmth and acceptance and hospitality from each and every one of us, because they're our neighbors. Now, I think also in order to be a good neighbor, you have to make some sacrifices. I have a neighbor behind me, a 3-year-old named Caleb. Yesterday morning, I was desperately working on a sermon. I was trying to do laundry, and I was trying to at least pick my house up a little bit in preparation for the birthday lunch, which is at my house on Tuesday. So I'm busy scurrying around, and I hear, "Mrs. Nancy!" That's what he calls me. "Mrs. Nancy!" And I looked out from my laundry room across my house and out the back sunroom, and there, standing on the property line in the backyard, is 3-year-old Caleb. "Mrs. Nancy!" Now, Caleb loves my cats, but he cannot cross the property line if I don't respond. So his parents have been clear. You can't go to the Millville's house unless Mr. or Mrs. Millville are home. So he's standing there wanting to know if I'm home. He couldn't see me. I could have just as easily have ignored that call. I could have gone on doing my work and pretended that he wasn't there. Would that have been very neighborly of me? You see, I was busy. I had lots to accomplish and just a little bit of time to do it in. And I knew that if I went outside with Caleb, it's a good 10 or 15 minutes while we wait for one of the cats to show up, while we pet the cat, while mom always, or dad, always comes over with him then. Well, we chat. Being a good neighbor involves a little bit of sacrifice on my part. In that case, it's a sacrifice of time. I had to put what I was doing on the back burner and just be willing to stop and go to be a good neighbor. Being a good neighbor requires that sometimes we need to sacrifice some things, and sometimes that's time. I'm hoping in the next few weeks we'll have an invitation for all of you to sacrifice some of your time, to go and help other Lutherans just down the thruway who experienced, the floods where Pastor Mary Ellen's Lockport home got flooded with 5 feet of water in the basement. Well, there's a Lutheran church in Herkimer. You know where Herkimer is? The other side of Utica. That congregation's basement likewise got flooded. Imagine what's in your basement, what's in the basement here. Gone. Now, there was an invitation sent on the 3rd of July to leave on the 4th of July to go out there and help them muck it out with the mud and all the other crud that comes in when there's a flood. But that was such short notice, I didn't invite you all. But I'm hoping in the next few weeks, as they begin the repairing process, that there will be another invitation. And I'm hoping some of you will sacrifice some of your time, just a day or two, to drive down the thruway and nail up some wallboard, or even transport some furniture. We have a congregation here in Western New York that's closing. Maybe what we need to do is haul that Sunday school furniture and those kids' books and things like that, and Bibles that need to be in every church. Maybe our job is to haul that down the thruway and give it to a church that's lost everything. But it will require some sacrifice of our time. Being a good neighbor also sometimes requires sacrificing money. I'm going to tell you a story about my husband's church. They've gone through a couple of different building programs, and one of them, and I don't remember which one, had this phrase, not equal gifts, but equal sacrifice. Not equal gifts, but equal sacrifice. Because the truth is, not everyone can give the same amount of money to any cause. But we can all give sacrificial. So one guy in the congregation who really didn't have a whole lot of money. He worked up at the Niagara Falls Air Base in the as an air traffic controller. Well, he had a little money because he was an air traffic controller. But he decided what he was going to do to sacrifice for that building program was to quit going out for lunch. Every day, he would just leave his home in Clarence Center. He'd drive up to Niagara Falls, and when lunchtime came, he'd go to one of the fast food restaurants in the area. Never packed his own lunch. So what do you spend on lunch at fast food? $6, $7, $8 maybe for a single person? Okay? So he decided that instead of doing that 5 days a week, he was going to take that $6, $7, $8 a day that he would have spent, and he was going to set it aside. Yeah, that's $40-ish a week, okay? Times 3 years. That was what the program, the commitment was for 3 years. And multiply that out. That's a significant contribution at the end. But it meant what he had to do was plan lunch before he left in the morning. He had to ask his wife, who did the grocery shopping, to make sure she got what he needed, including little brown bags, okay, so that he could make his lunch. He had to get up a little earlier every day because he had to take time to make his lunch. Not equal gifts, but equal sacrifice. Being a good neighbor sometimes means we need to make those kinds of sacrifices so that even if we can't be present in our person, we can be present in our gifts. Okay? Being a good neighbor. We can't go all over the world. We can't all go down the road to Herkimer. But Lutheran Disaster Response is there, and maybe what you can do is sacrifice a little something that you do in order to contribute to Lutheran Disaster Response so that they can be there, being a good neighbor. Won't you be my neighbor? That's what Mr. Rogers wanted to know. Won't you be my neighbor?
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? It's a neighborly day in this beauty wood, a neighborly day for a beauty. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? I have always wanted to have a neighbor just like you. I've always wanted to live in a neighborhood with you, so let's make the most of this beautiful day. Since we're together, we might as well say, would you be mine? Would you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Won't you please? Won't you please? Please won't you be my neighbor?
The man in the ditch in the Good Samaritan story was looking for a neighbor. You and I sometimes find ourselves in that ditch. We're the ones who need to receive that help from other neighbors, maybe even the scariest kind of people we know. But you and I also are sometimes the man who passed by, named a Samaritan, who had the opportunity to stop. May we be those good Samaritans, day in and day out. Amen.